Howdy. I've not been keeping up with my Dickens project. Let me be more specific. I have been reading my Dickens novels because that's very easy for me. But I've not been keeping up with keeping a video record of talking about the various Dickens novels I'm covering. So let me just rant out David Copperfield, which is from several months ago. I just wanted to talk about two of my favorite characters from David Copperfield. First, Aunt Betsey Trotwood, who is the Dickens character I identify with the most, and I will come back to her. And then Mr. Dick, who is kind of a ward of Aunt Betsy. So a little short capsule description of Aunt Betsey Trotwood. We actually meet her at the very beginning of the novel when David Copperfield's mother is pregnant with him, and she's a widow, so he's a posthumous child. That's how the novel begins. And Aunt Betsy shows up. This is before David himself is born, and he is named after his father, who is also David Copperfield. And Aunt Betsy trots up, Aunt Betsey Trotwood, and she has determined that her niece-in-law, because it's her David Copperfield, the deceased, was her blood nephew, and this is the wife. So she has determined, Aunt Betsy has determined, that this child is going to be a girl. Well, as we know, David Copperfield is born, and Aunt Betsy is so offended that David is not a girl, she just trots out the moment she finds out the baby is a boy. Okay, the next time that Aunt Betsy shows up is when David is a runaway. He has run away from the blacking factory, or is it no, I'm sorry. Okay, in any case, he's run away from the factory of his stepfather after his mother has died. His mom's died, his stepfather has put him to work, and it's a pretty brutal situation for young David, and he decides he is going to run away to the one relative he knows about, Aunt Betsy. And he shows up at Aunt Betsy's house. He only kind of knows what town she lives in, and then he asks some direction. He gets stuff stolen from him. He is extremely raggedy by the time he shows up on his aunt's doorstep. And when he's there, Aunt Betsy actually introduces the character of Mr. Dick immediately, because she keeps asking Mr. Dick, well, what shall we do with this boy? Like, we need to feed him, we need to clean him, we need to clothe him. And that's Mr. Dick. Some other stuff we learn about Aunt Betsy. We notice she doesn't like donkeys on her hill. And there's a little bit, it's not really her hill, it's a hill that's near her house, but she doesn't actually own the land. And she has determined there will be no donkeys on that hill. And that's one of the things that really made me identify with Aunt Betsy all the time. She is determined. She is not going to have donkeys on that hill. And she gets her maid to come out with her. And, they whack at people on the donkeys. And it gets to be kind of funny when the stepfather, Mr. Murdstone, and his sister, Miss Murdstone, show up, of course, on donkeys on the hill. In any case, some other things we learn about Aunt Betsy later on. She shows up at Trotwood's, so David Copperfield's apartment in London, after she thinks she has lost all her money. And we find out later she didn't, but again, we'll come back to that. She is a very determined woman, and then again, we later learn that her husband, and she had been married, but even though she's called Miss Trotwood, Aunt Betsy Trotwood, she had been married, and she separated from her husband. I don't think she actually got a divorce. It doesn't matter, because she didn't get remarried anyway. Her husband had been an alcoholic, had been abusive. And that said, he's terrorized her through her life and gives her money. So obviously I don't really associate myself with that. That said, even though her husband had done very bad by her, when he is near death and in the hospital, she is there with him till the end. And we find this out afterwards. There's whole plot points, it doesn't matter. It's David Copperfield is Dickens' longest novel, and it's kind of ramshackle, partly because it's part autobiography, part wish fulfillment on the part of Dickens, and we'll get back to that another time. And Aunt Betsy, I'm not quite sure where he got the character of Aunt Betsy. He did base a lot of his characters on people he had run into, and especially the most bizarre of the characters are almost definitely based on either something he's read or an actual person he talked with. The more strange the character, almost definitely it was based on a real person. So let me go to Mr. Dick. And again, I'm not sure who or what gave him the idea to create this character. Mr. Dick is kind of a distant relative to Aunt Betsy, who she takes care of. We find out his name is Richard something or other. It doesn't matter what his last name is. But he has some kind of mental or cognitive issue. And to try to be a little more explicit about this, he seems very simple. He's very straightforward. He often does habitual things. So he likes to fly kites. He makes his own kites and flies them. He often rattles the change in his pocket. And the main thing is he's writing his memorial, which is actually supposed to be a narrative of his own life and how he has been treated, because he had more near relatives who wanted to take the money that was left to him, I guess, to take care of him, institutionalize him and take the money. Okay? Aunt Betsy stepped in and has taken charge of Mr. Dick. All of Mr. Dick's money is therefore spent on him because she doesn't need the money. She is independently wealthy. She has her own money. But Mr. Dick is shown as being able to stay on task when he and Aunt Betsy show up at David Copperfield's London digs because they don't have any money anymore. They help David in his profession as trying to do reporting of parliamentary sessions. Mr. Dick will copy things out. But his main problem is anytime he's writing, he wants to talk about King Charles I's head. King Charles I, of course, was decapitated by the masses, by the Puritans, as part of the English Civil War. In any case, Mr. Dick can't get him out of his head. Can't get the head out of his head. And it's supposed to be symbolic, yada, yada, yada. Various people will postulate what Mr. Dick's problem actually was. He may have been on the autism spectrum. He definitely did not think normally the way most of the people do. He is a bit strange. And this is the thing about Dickens. He collects strange people, strange aspects about them. And I find it very interesting. That said, Aunt Betsy lets Mr. Dick be himself. She does not try to restrict him. I mean, every so often she tells him to stop, jingling his change. And then between her and David, they figure out when they really need him to make money. They actually don't need him to make money. He still has his own money. When Aunt Betsy goes broke, Mr. Dick still actually has his own money. But Aunt Betsy doesn't want to let him spend any of that money on the rest of them. That said, Mr. Dick is very anxious. And they said, oh, okay, so you can copy out things that David writes down. The problem is, of course, Charles I's head. So they give him a separate piece of paper that he can, anytime he thinks about King Charles I, he'll go over and write Charles's head on the other piece of paper. So there's all sorts of things that could be at issue with Mr. Dick. In any case, I find Mr. Dick and Aunt Betsy to be quite a believable set of people. I could see myself behaving as Aunt Betsy did if I were in her situation. And then of course I have my own parallels between Mr. Dick and my son Diarmuid, who's on the autism spectrum. Anyway,